Here we are, dear friends, at part 77 in our continued study of chapter 19. So Jesus then will have the authority to be King of Kings and Lord of Lords. The sword shows that he will have the power to put down all his enemies and all who oppose him. I saw an angel standing on the sun. He cried with a loud voice, saying to all the birds that fly in the midst of heaven, come and gather together for the supper of the great God, that you may eat the flesh of kings, the flesh of captains, the flesh of mighty men, the flesh of horses, and of those who sit on them, and the flesh of all people, free and slave, both small and great. That's from the New King James Bible. Points to note, I saw an angel standing on the sun. The sun stands for the strongest country in the world at any given time. Today it is America. What will it be in the future? It will be the kingdom. The kingdom will be the only strong country when Jesus becomes king, since his kingdom will cover the whole world. The saints will be the new heaven, and the kingdom will be the new sun. An angel standing on the sun means the saints standing in the kingdom. They will be standing in it as it will be their base, their home. They will be in control of it. The angel cried with a loud voice. This will be a decree issued by the government in Jerusalem with a loud voice, so that it will be issued in a way that the whole world would clearly hear it, and the whole world will be made very much aware of this decree, like all the decrees which will come from the government in Jerusalem. It will be a call to the birds that fly in the midst of heaven. This is from the New King James Bible. Here's what other versions say. The King James Bible says, the fowls that fly in the midst of heaven. The Catholic RSV says, the birds that fly in mid-heaven. The New English Bible says, the birds flying in mid-heaven. Heaven means the saints at that stage, but what is mid-heaven? Midway through a football match is halfway through it. Mid-heaven is half a heaven. The saints will be the Division 1, the Division 1 team, and the birds in mid-heaven will be a Division 2 team. There will be a ruling class, since that is what heaven stands for. There will be the human governments which will exist when Jesus comes. Human governments. There will be those governments which accept him. As a reward for accepting him, Jesus will invite them to a new spectacle. And they will be invited to view this. There will be only caretaker governments, since the real government will be in Jerusalem, made up of the king and the saints. And that is why there will be a second division team. There will be only mid-heaven, not real heaven. The birds stand for people. In Revelation chapter 18, birds stand for the Catholic clergy, where they're called loathsome. But the king of Babylon had a dream in which he saw a high tree and the birds of heaven nestled in its branches. So this is verse 12 in the King James Version. The tree stood for the Babylonian Empire. The birds of heaven in its branches stood for the nations which were in its empire. That's what the birds stood for in the Empire of Babylon. All those nations and governments who probably had only very limited independence. It will be much the same with human governments, which Jesus will call to view the spectacle. What will happen to governments which refuse to accept Jesus? The Redeemer shall come to Zion, the nation and the kingdom that does not serve you shall perish. such nation shall be destroyed. The Jewish Tanakh Bible. This is addressed to Zion and to its Redeemer, Jesus Christ. This decree will go to the world just after Jesus is crowned King in Zion. And the decree will be issued on behalf of God himself. It will say, be wise now therefore, O kings, be warned, O judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling. Worship in purity, lest he be angry and you perish from the way. For in a little while his anger will blaze. That will be a decree that will go from Jerusalem after Christ comes calling on all the world leaders to submit to Christ. So the anger of Jesus will blaze against the governments which will not accept him, and he will destroy them. Earlier in the same psalm we read, you can smash them with an iron mace, shatter them like potter's ware, from the Jewish Tanakh version. Now the spectacle, come and gather together for the supper of the great God, that you may eat the flesh of kings, the flesh of captains, the flesh of mighty men, the flesh of horses, and of those who sit on them, and the flesh of all people, free and slave, both small and great. This is from the New King James Version. The Catholic Jerusalem Version says, come here, gather together at the great feast which God is giving. There will be the flesh of kings for you, and the flesh of great generals and heroes, the flesh of horses and their riders, and of all kinds of men, citizens and slaves, small and great. Points to note, Jesus will issue invitations to the supper of the great God. The invitations will go to the ruling classes who will accept him in all countries, which will accept him. Kings, captains and mighty men. Kings stand for political leaders, captains stand for the military leaders, mighty men stand for very prominent figures, the stars as they're sometimes called. Horses and their riders, these stand for the leaders who have already been described. It is Hebrew parallelism, but the same idea is repeated for the sake of emphasis. The riders of a horse, or the rider of a horse, controls the horse. The four horsemen controlled the events in the Roman Empire in their day. Jesus and his saints riding on white horses stand for their control of military events at the start of the kingdom. The riders on horses at the supper of the great God will be those leaders who will be controlling the destinies of the nations in question at the second coming. In other words, the ruling elite, the political leaders of the various countries of the world who actually accept Christ. All people, free and slave, both small and great. This refers to the common people. This whole passage describes people who will refuse to accept Jesus when he comes. That is the spectacle that they will view. They will be made up of the leaders and common people. So the leaders of the countries who accept Christ will be invited by him to view the humiliation, the total humiliation of the leaders of the countries who refuse to accept him. So I hope that this is not confusing you. Let's take, when Christ comes, let's just say that 70 countries accept him. This is just pure guesswork. The leaders of those 70 countries will be rewarded. It's only fair that they will, but the leaders of the other countries of the world will of course not be rewarded, they'll be punished. And the leaders of the 70 countries who accept him will be invited to see the public humiliation of the leaders of the countries who refuse him.
Wow.
It's going to be some spectacle, isn't it?
It is.
Come that you may eat the flesh of kings, captains, mighty men, and all people. If they were to eat the flesh of their fellow human beings, it would be cannibalism, and Jesus would never allow that. So what will he allow? He will allow this whole group to be publicly condemned, humiliated, or executed. There will be a terrible price to pay for any political leader, prime minister, president, cabinet members in any country that refuse to accept Christ, and there will be a dreadful public execution of them, which of course will be witnessed by the whole world. And he will invite another group to witness it at close quarters. That group will be the leaders of the countries which will accept him. And what a spectacle it will be for them to witness. What grim viewing. Now, this is almost the last part. Then we turn now to Brussels and we turn to the European Union. Something that we've spoken quite a lot about, but it seems the very last war before the 7 would be against that same European Union.
Wow.
Led by the European Commission, and of course at that time it would seem that they will actually have their own army. If they don't have their own fully fledged army, what will happen is they will call on the various armies of the different countries to join them in this war. So Jesus versus the European Union, and this will be the final war. I saw the beast, the kings of the earth and their armies. Note the beast. There's only one beast in question. That's the European Union, which is being formed as a new Roman Empire. And their armies gathered together to make war against him who sat on the horse and against his army. It will be Jesus and his saints against the European army of the European Union. It will be the final war. It will be the second battle between Jesus and the European Union. It will be the 7th and last thunder, because the first one's actually described in chapter 17. It will be the 7th and last thunder. It will be the 7th and last military campaign of Jesus and his saints. Now, punishment of the European Union and the false prophet. The beast was taken prisoner together with the false prophet. These two were thrown alive into the fiery lake of burning sulphur. That's from the Catholic Jerusalem Bible. Points to note, it will be the leaders of the European Union who will be thrown into the lake of fire. And so too will be the false prophet. It will be a real fire. It will be the fires of hell, which do not exist now, but it will then. It is possible that the European headquarters in Brussels and the European Parliament at Strasbourg will both go up in flames. The punishment of the EU leaders will take place as part of the eating and of the flesh of kings. It is listed as coming before the war with the European Union. That is the eating of the flesh of kings. But this is a pattern like we saw in the book of Revelation. Some events are listed as happening before other events, even though they actually come after them. So the common people receive less punishment. The rest were killed with the sword which proceeded from the mouth of him who sat on the horse. All the birds were filled with their flesh. Points to note, the rest refers to the common people, since the previous verse had described the leaders. The sword which proceeded from the mouth of him who sat on the horse. Him who sat on the horse is Jesus. The sword which proceeded from his mouth is something which will come out of his mouth, and that will be his words. They will be the words of punishment, and that is why they are compared to a sword. Jesus will utter a sentence against the members of this group, it will be a sentence of death. He will not throw them into a lake of fire as he will do to the leaders. There will be distinction between the punishment for the leaders of the countries who refuse to accept them and the common people. The leaders will receive a much more severe punishment. This group will be made up of ordinary people who will refuse to accept Jesus when he comes. All the birds were filled with their flesh. The viewing group will be there to the end. They will be filled with the sights and sounds of the moans and groans of their fellow human beings as they see them being refused entry into the kingdom by Jesus. Could the birds be the creatures which we see every day flying through the air? Could Jesus call on real birds to eat tens of thousands of human bodies? It is virtually possible that is what it actually meant. The Bible is all about humans, and birds and animals are used in the prophecies only to illustrate human activities. The birds in question are human beings. So what is meant then is not birds literally eating human flesh, and neither is it about human beings eating human flesh. It's about public humiliation of a certain group. It's going to be pretty grim and pretty awful, and there will be distinction. Like we saw, the leaders will be actually thrown literally into a lake of fire, and I think it will be quite literal. There will be, it's a frightening thought, isn't it?
It is.
They'll be roasted to death.
They will.
But the other people will receive less severe, maybe an instant death. But anyway, it is going to be grim, but it's, as I say, it's written here, and the world has to face it. Finally, regarding the false prophet, far be it from me to just simply say that the false prophet in question is going to be the Pope. We have to have evidence, and as we saw, in many occasions, one individual stands for thousands, especially one angel. And the question has been raised, could the false prophet represent a group rather than an individual? Well, we have to consider the circumstances. Here will be the European Union. They will be looking for advice, because it will be actually holy war, and they will be desperate to find direction as to what they should do. And they will, it says here in the Catholic Jerusalem Bible that they saw the beast with the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to fight the rider and his army, a war between a human army and Jesus and his saints on the other. But the beast was taken prisoner, and that would be the European Union and its armies, all its institutions will be, as it were, enclosed in a prison, and that can only mean one thing: they will be destroyed, obliterated, wiped out. They will be taken prisoner together with the false prophet who would work miracles at the beast's behalf. In other words, whoever this false prophet is, he will be working miracles on behalf of the European Union. And we saw in chapter 13 with the beast of the earth, the word miracle means sign. So the only figure that fits is not a group, it's the Pope. Because what group would it be? But we have got a ready-made individual person who will without question be very involved up to his eyes, and so too will his ambassadors to all the countries. It will be the Pope, there's no escaping it.
It's already begun, isn't it?
It has, and he will be their spiritual advisor. He will speak on their behalf. But what sign will he? The sign will be that he will formally give full support, his backing to the European army, and the world will see that and hear it. They will say, oh, did you hear that the Pope is backing the army, the European army, the Brussels army? And people say, oh, if the Pope is backing it, it must be right.
But
that's going to be a powerful sign for the world. and that will be the miracle, the sign. That will be what, and it will broadcast, and that will have a tremendous bearing on the whole world. So
Thank you,
there's
Neil.
no denying, I'm afraid, that it's going to be the Pope.
No. Thank you, Neil. That was so beautiful. Thank you.